Welcome back, everybody. I'm Sherry Snelling, your host, gerontologist, author, and CEO of the Caregiving Club, and this is our Season 1, Episode 4 of our Caregiving Club newscast for the week of March 23rd. We have so much to share with you, so we're going to get right into it, but let me just give you a quick overview of all the different segments that you're going to hear about. So in our Caregiver Wellness news, we are celebrating Brain Health Awareness Week, which is March 16th through March 22nd. And so we're going to talk about some of the latest studies about how our brains develop, why the brains of Super Agers are different, and also how AI is changing the game when it comes to identifying early markers for things like dementia or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, but also how to keep our brains healthier over our lifespan. So lots to share with you there. Then when we dive into our Well Home Design news, it is International Happiness Day on March 20th, and there was a recent article I came across called How to Create Happy Decor in Your Home. And lo and behold, so many of the recommendations in this article were things that I have written about for the Snug home, which is now becoming my third book, but also I've done a webinar that is free to any of you who are interested. It's actually focused on dementia-friendly design, but we're going to expand it into more of the all-encompassing neuro design and dopamine design that you hear about. So we're going to cover all of that in that segment, but also we're going to share with you 3 fantastic new products that really relate to brain health and sleep. And I think you'll be really interested in all the things that are coming out that are really helping us make our homes this kind of nice scientific sanctuary for all of us. And then when we change gears and go to caregiving in the workplace, the Companies That Care Day was on March 19th, and I'm going to share with you an article that I wrote for employers that talks about the influence and importance of ERGs, which are employee resource groups, and how many of them now focus on family caregiving. And I've been doing a lot of talks and speeches and speaking engagements with these ERGs of different companies around the country, and that's been really fascinating and very eye-opening, great discussions when I do those things. So that's always really nice. Then there's also a couple articles in this space that we want to talk about. One is how to find meaning and mattering after you quote unquote retire, and what are you looking for now in this encore phase of life? How do you find that meaning? So that's an interesting article. And then another article which I think is really concerning for employers to pay attention to, and it's that the sandwich generation, so of course those are caregivers who have children and older parents are caring for, have an enormous level of health debt. What does that mean? How's it impacting them, and what should employers maybe think about when it comes to the health of their workplace and their employees? And then finally, in pop culture, we're going to do a little twist. I, as you know, focus on positivity psychology, but I gotta give an award. It's not a good award. It's the Ageism Award of the month. And it goes to a TV cable news anchor. We're going to explain why. We're also going to talk a little bit about how the media is really needing an upgrade, an upskilling, if you will, when it comes to demographics in society, and particularly older adults. And what does ageism really mean? And what can we share with them that might make their news reporting just a little bit more accurate, if you will. So with that, I just want to say, don't forget to subscribe to this newscast on our Caregiving Club YouTube channel. You can hit the like button or hopefully hit the subscribe button, and then you'll get a notification every time we have a new newscast come out every couple of weeks. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at our Caregiver Wellness news. So welcome to Caregiver Wellness News, and this segment is always so huge because I always find so many new research studies and surveys and great articles and other services, products, and programs that are happening. So we're trying to stuff a whole lot into this particular segment, but I want to start with AI, artificial intelligence, because this is the topic of the day, right? We all have heard about AI, or many of us are using it now, whether it's in business or in school or whatever it is. And it's really disrupting, if you will, how we do things, how we learn. How we put things together. And there's, big controversies out there. Some people absolutely love it, think it's the best thing since sliced bread. Other people are a little bit more skeptical. What does this really mean? Is this going to hurt certain things? Like, will people in the future not have the capability of even writing one word? They're just going to, rely on Chat GPT to write everything for them. As a writer, that hurts my heart. But, there's a lot of conversation going on out there about AI. But one of the things I think that AI can be so instrumental in is in health, and particularly in the scientific findings of taking all this big data, if you will, analyzing it, sifting through it, finding the patterns and other things. And I learned a little bit about this before we got into this big AI trend, if you will, over the last couple of years. About 10 years ago, I worked at an academic medical center in Southern California, and I worked with two of the top researchers in neuroscience, in Alzheimer's and brain health. And they were phenomenal. I mean, world renowned. They had the largest grants from the National Institutes on Health. And one of their projects that they got the grant on, I think it was a $50 million grant at the time, was to take all of the brain scans that were being done worldwide. Think about that. And to put them into this, basically, there's only two of these machines in the world. They had one at USC where we were, and then NASA has one. So you can imagine how sophisticated this thing is. It's basically a hyper MRI type machine and scanner. But anyway, they would put all of the brain scans into this with an algorithm software that they had developed and start to do what we just talked about, sift through all this big data, look for the patterns, what makes some people get Alzheimer's and others not, and all these kinds of things. So I wanted to share with you the latest of what's happening in AI, because there were a couple of really great articles, one of them from USC. So USC being one of the centers for this big data analysis on brain health and brain disorders. And so the USC one said that they can track how fast the brain is aging. Now, that is one of the patterns that we know in Alzheimer's, but also in things like Down syndrome. Part of what's happening in the bodies of people with Down syndrome is that all of their cells are aging at an accelerated pace. Now, when it comes to something like Alzheimer's, it's more the brain is aging at an accelerated pace. And so the neurons, the cells in the brain are dying, they're atrophying, they're shrinking, and then they're dying. They're not being replenished. We're not building new neural networks and scaffolding through neuroplasticity, which is something you can do through brain exercises. It won't happen in the brain of someone who has this disease. So what one of the professors and scientists at USC found is that they can start to predict when significant brain aging impacts cognition. And they found also significant differences between the MRIs of women versus men. And, that is a big issue because we know that 66% of all Alzheimer's cases are women. So women are more profoundly affected by this disease, but we still don't know why. We're looking at estrogen levels. We're looking at fertility, what age you had your children and how many children you had. There's just all, and, things like oxidative stress and insulin resistance, which tends to be a little bit higher in women. All of these things are being looked at by researchers, but what they are leading to is they really believe they're on the pathway. And I mean, I'm not talking about 20 years from now. I'm talking about maybe next year, hopefully, maybe in a couple of years, finding some of the answers on what are these issues that we can start to address earlier in life, earlier in the lifespan, before any kind of diagnosis or even red flags show up, to try to change the trajectory of certain diseases. So that's really fascinating. The other thing that AI is doing, and this is a different group, a different scientific group, but they are predicting with up to 93% accuracy using brain scans on diagnosis. So what they did, I'll just tell you, the research was among people 69 to 76 years old. They had 800 MRI brain scans. That's a good number. They had a mixed cohort of people who already had Alzheimer's, who had MCI, which is mild cognitive impairment, which is kind of, for some people, it could be pre-Alzheimer's. Like if you get MCI or diagnosed, you might move on to actual Alzheimer's. For some people, they just stick with MCI throughout the rest of their lives. So they do have some kind of memory loss and some issues, but it isn't full-blown Alzheimer's. And then people who had no Alzheimer's at all. So that was the mixed cohort of the 800 brain scans they looked at. And what they found is that in women's brains, in the female brains, the brain volume loss occurred in the left middle temporal cortex, which actually deals with language and with visual perception. Very interesting, right? So that's something to think about, to study further. For men, the brain scan showed that the right entorhinal cortex, I think I'm saying that properly, was impacted, and that's the part of the brain that provides a sense of time. So for men, not knowing what era they're in, what time or day of the week or month or whatever it is. So these are all very interesting. They give us more clues as to what's happening in the brains. And again, men versus women is something that's really enlightening to see, because this only started happening maybe 20 years ago, where we started studying both genders. It used to be we just studied men, and then we tried to apply that to women, and we know that doesn't work, because women and men's bodies are different. So anyway, I just thought that was really interesting to note that AI is going to make a big difference in our ability to really tackle this disease and hopefully come up with some preventions while we're also searching for a cure. Okay. Next thing I wanted to get into is brain development, because I may have mentioned this, but Brain Health Awareness Week is March 16th through the 22nd. So March is a big month for brain health. And so brain development, and then Super Agers brains. Why are they different? Okay, so let's start first of all with an article that came out that said there's really 5 phases to brain development. So let me go through them with you here. The first phase is what they call childhood. So this is basically about age 9 through our late 20s, and that is when the brain finally forms. So the last part of the brain to form is the frontal lobes, and this is where we have, rational thinking, decision making, impulse control. This is why teens and young 20s, it's so tough, because their brains are not formed, properly yet. And we put so much responsibility and stuff on, our younger generation, but we have to realize their brains are not fully formed. Their brains are also very vulnerable to things like medications. So putting kids on medications too soon, if you don't need to, nutrition, getting enough vitamin D and sunshine, getting enough exercise where they're pumping the blood and oxygen, through the arteries, keeping the brain blood vessels healthy as well. So all of those things really play into brain health. Okay, so the second phase is basically, age 30, when your brain is formed, through your early 60s. And this is what they call the adolescent phase of the brain. And it's where the brain, stabilizes, but it also is at maximum performance now, because, we are active in the world, hopefully we have jobs and careers and maybe families, and we're involved in communities and activities and social engagements, and all those kinds of things are going on at that period of life. And so the brain is really building up its own machine learning, right? It's coming in, getting all these experiences, it's gathering all this knowledge. I talk in one of my talks that I do that in the 1950s, our brains could absorb about 28,000 words a day. And that's everything from the spoken word that you hear from people, street signs, things you might read, things you read online, whatever. 28,000. Today, it's over 100,000 words. It's amazing. Our brains are functioning so fast, and they're growing so fast to absorb all this data. But anyway, that's a very active phase, and that's where we're doing a lot of neuroplasticity, whether we know it or not. We're working out all the different areas of our brain for the most part, some areas more than not. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but that's an active phase, the adolescent phase. Now, here's interesting. The adult phase of the brain is age 66 to 79. And this is where, without any effort, we're kind of continuing to work well. We've got our cognitive functioning, we've got executive functioning. Those are different types of, brain cognition. We've got both crystallized and fluid intelligence. And what that means is we've got, the crystallized intelligence are things we learn, like how to ride a bike that you don't forget how to do. The fluid intelligence is more of things you're picking up on a daily basis and you're kind of learning, maybe you learn a new language or something. So all of this is very strong through kind of our late 70s, when for most people then typically we start to see the decline. So after age 83, they're saying that this is the next phase, and this is when regions of the brain start to shrink. And so just how we lose inches in, our height because we're losing bone mass and muscle mass, we are losing, the certain regions of the brain and our ability to have some of that executive functioning and fluid intelligence and other things like that. So we're only using a smaller percentage of our brain. This is probably when the most important phase, I'd say the adult phase and then this aging phase, are the most important phases to be doing brain exercises. Now, it's not that you shouldn't do it throughout life, but sometimes, as I said, we're doing it automatically. When we get older, we're less active. We might be less socially engaged. Maybe we're not learning new things as rapidly as we did. We have to pick up the pace, though. We got to keep that going, because that will then give you more years of steady cognition, executive functioning, and all that. If we learn that neuroplasticity, how to harness that, how to build those neurons so that they're transmitting to each other in the brain and building more scaffolding so that different parts of the brain aren't shrinking and not being used. So that just gives you some insights as to how the brain works, which I thought was really interesting. And the researchers are looking now too at the different age groups. Like, why is it that people with autism are diagnosed in their childhood and not in their adulthood, versus somebody with Alzheimer's is diagnosed later in life, even though they may have been living with the disease for 20 or 25 years or whatever it is. So fascinating stuff there. The other thing is let's see. I did the late in life, yes. Oh, here's something that they found that was really interesting. So in this study, 800 brain scans, they gave the participants a lifetime enrichment score. Okay. And, oh no, this is different. I'm sorry. Pardon me. That was the brain phase. This is a different study now. Now we're looking at cohort. Okay, this is different. 2,000 participants. They analyzed them in their home environment. So they didn't come to a clinic. They didn't come to a lab. They just kind of self-reported on how things were going at home. And then they looked at three different phases. Again, this is going back to early life, midlife, and late life. And what they looked at is, okay, they asked them, in your early life, now these are older people. So did you go to the library a lot? Did you check out books? Did you read a lot? We didn't have video games for some of us who are a little bit older, and we didn't have streaming television. We only had a certain number of channels and all that. So, were you doing more reading? Were you doing more learning? Did you play a musical or learn a musical instrument? Did you learn other languages? Things like that. Did you have a globe? Did you have an encyclopedia? Because we didn't have the internet, again. So all of these questions got asked. Then in midlife, they looked at income levels. They looked at educational levels. And then they looked at things like, were people still reading? Maybe not as many books, although that was still a different category, but were they reading the news? Did they read a daily newspaper? Did they read magazines? Did they stay engaged in kind of that learning and stimulating activities that enhanced kind of the multisensory, the five senses environment? And then finally, in late life, they looked on the frequency of cognitive activities, like, did they continue to read? Did they write letters? Or, did they write things down, like maybe their memoirs, their memories, or whatever? Did they like playing games? So there was a lot of social activity that also engaged the brain. So whether it was Scrabble or, um, bridge or mahjong or whatever it is, were they still playing kind of those types of games that would certainly enhance the social aspect of things? And then what they did is they gave each one of these participants a life enrichment score based on all of those different categories they looked at. And they also then again looked at they did brain scans on them. So they looked at the MRIs. And what they found is that the higher lifetime enrichment score, so people had done all these things throughout their life, had a 38% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's or dementia, and a 36% lower risk of developing mild cognitive impairment. Now, what was interesting is it wasn't just that would you get Alzheimer's later in life, depending on how many of these things you did, but when would you get it? So they also looked at that. So what they found is that the top 10 scoring the highest in life enrichment activities developed dementia. Now, this is interesting, at an average age of 93.8 years. And the bottom 10% didn't do as much, developed dementia around the age of 88. So, you're getting about maybe 6 more years of life of good cognition. So it's never too early. It's never too late to do any of these things. But again, keep in mind that if you let your brain be sedentary, it will start to shrink. It will start to, certain regions won't work as well, and you run the risk of having some of these diseases like dementia. Whereas, again, as we know, as we, try to keep our brains engaged and do as much as we can, then we're going to certainly improve our brain health over a longer period of lifetime. And then finally, the Super Agers. Now, many of you have probably heard of this term, Super Agers. It really speaks to the group of people who are in their 80s and above. But the group who is 85 years and older is the fastest growing demographic group in the US. What does that mean? That means that right now, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if we have, let's just say, if we have 100,000 people, and it's much bigger than that, I think, but if we have 100,000 people over the age of 85, it's going to like 5 times or 6 times be 5 times larger by 2050. So it's going to exponentially grow. And again, that's because of our longevity. So these super agers are people who really are performing as well in their 80s as they did in their 50s and 60s, and particularly when it comes to brain health. So let me explain. As we get older, the cortex, which is really the gray matter on the cerebrum of our brains, and those are things that the cerebrum is really tied to higher functioning. So it's tied to thinking and memory and decision making and voluntary movement and language and sensory processing. But it usually shrinks as we age. And that then has, a negative effect on our cognition and our ability to have conversations and think through problems and all those types of things. So what the research has found is that the outer layer of their brains had thinned for normal people, but super agers had no thinning. There was no thinning on the kind of the lining of the cortex and the gray matter. And this is how super agers' brains are different. So they looked like brain scan of somebody who was like in their 50s or 60s. So the researchers were really fascinated by this. And, I won't go into it, but if you're interested in this, Eric Topol, who's a professor and cardiologist, he wrote a book several years ago called Super Agers, an evidence-based approach to longevity. Now, he calls super agers the welderly. You're going to talk about the word elderly in a minute when we get to pop culture, but okay, we'll accept that. The welderly is what he calls super agers. But basically, it's because he said they have more what we call von Economo neurons. And these are linked to a rapid assessment of complex social scenarios, self-awareness, empathy, and these are all keys to longevity. So, and they control intuitive behavior. So how we know what to say, what to do when we're with others, those types of things. These types of neurons, of course, either shrink or disappear in people who have dementia, particularly people with frontotemporal dementia, where that inability to be empathetic and inability to have certain sensitivities to others in your behavior and conversation, but also Parkinson's, autism, ADHD, and some mental disorders all have a dysfunction of these neurons, these von Economo neurons, and that changes their behavior and their social interaction capability. So again, researchers are really looking at these particular neurons. Why do they dysfunction? What's happening in the brain of those who have some of these diseases or disorders that makes those different? And then finally, our Brain HQ friends at Posit Science, we love those guys. We're going to have them back on the podcast because they just did a 20-year research study, fascinating, and found out so many great things about brain exercises and longevity, and we're going to share all that with you. But they were talking about how when it comes to brain exercises, it's the different exercises you do. So you don't do the same thing over and over, like do a crossword puzzle every week, which is fine. You do different things, lots of different exercises. It's the same thing as, think of this. If you are working out your neck, from the neck down, right? We all know how to do that. We know that, okay, if you're doing like a body pump or a body training, you do the biceps, then you do the triceps, then you do some lunges, then you do some squats. So you're working out all the different muscles in your body, and you have to do that in order for your entire physical carriage to be strong, right? You don't want to just do biceps because you're not going to be able to walk on that bicep when you're in your 80s, right? You got to have better strength in your legs and your glutes and all that. Same thing with the brain. You can't just work out one part of the brain and expect it to fully function and flourish as we age. That's why I am such just a freak when it comes to five senses and multisensory activity, multisensory brain exercises, because you're working out different regions of the brain, particularly if you look at those five senses: smell, taste, touch, sound. What did I miss? I can't remember. Anyway, but five senses are really essential, and you want to focus on those, and those will give you different regions of the brain. So anyway, we're going to talk to those guys. They're going to tell us a little bit more about the brain exercises that they use. And they are number one, by the way. I mean, they're just the best. Everybody points to them as, best practice, best evidence-based exercising and all that. And then finally, in our Caregiver Wellness news, because I couldn't let March go without talking about National Nutrition Month. We know that, food equals mood, because it's all connected to our microbiome and the serotonin, which is, I write about as one of our 4 happiness hormones. But I wanted to just remind you guys that the mind diet is number one. I know keto has gotten some good kudos lately for brain health, but quite frankly, the mind diet has been tried and true. It's really kind of been, researched over decades, not just the last few years. And what it is it is a combination of the Mediterranean diet with the DASH diet, the DASH diet being the one that's heart healthy. So again, your brain and your heart need the same things. That's why they kind of combine them. What's different about the mind diet from the Mediterranean diet is that you eat 3 servings a week of the fatty omega-3 fish like salmon or mackerel or shrimp. Those are all really great, but you want 3 servings. In the Mediterranean diet, I think it's only maybe 2. And specifically, you want 7 servings a day. I know it sounds like a lot, but a lot of people do juices and stuff. So you can take a look at how to do this a little differently, but you want 7 servings of leafy greens, and you want, I think it was 5 to 7 servings of berries, particularly blueberries. So the darker the berry, the better it is for you. So that's just something to think about. And one of the things that I came across in one of the studies that was out there is it said that, we've looked at Alzheimer's as a brain disorder, a neurodegenerative disease, okay, that affects the brain, that then affects other things like our behavior, our language, and all of that. But now the researchers are starting to look at, and the big word of the day, inflammation. Everybody's talking about it. How do we lower the inflammation, which is related to stress and cortisol? So we want to lower that inflammation. Certain foods trigger it. We need to know what those foods are and be cautious. But we think now, the researchers do at least, that it's the inflammation that affects our organs like our skin or our lungs or, again, our gut and our microbiome and all of these places that is getting impacted by inflammation could be actually the start of Alzheimer's. And this is where then things start to decline and eventually makes its way to the brain and creates those tau tangles and that beta amyloid plaque. So fascinating stuff. So check out the Mind Diet. It's really great for you. And also, I'm just going to do a shout out to 3 podcasts that we have on brain health that you're going to really love. Go to our YouTube channel. You can watch them, or you can find them on any listening channel like, Sirius, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. The first one is Bonnie Kaplan. She wrote the Better Brain book. Fascinating about how our microbiome and our gut works with our brains. And she creates micronutrient diet plans where she has actually been able to help people get off their medications for schizophrenia, for ADHD, for autism, and she's been doing stuff with Alzheimer's. So she's on season 2, episode 4. Dr. Annie Fenn, she's one of our heroes. We love Annie. She has the Brain Health Kitchen Cookbook. She also does a cooking show on Substack. You want to check it out. She was on season 3, episode 23. So she talks a lot about the brain diet or the mind diet. And some really that Brain Health Kitchen cookbook is fascinating, and the recipes are really great. And then finally, Henry Mahncke, who is from Prosit Science, and they do the Brain HQ that we talked about, who we're going to have on the podcast again. We got to wrangle him. He's been so busy out there talking about this 20-year study they've done, but we're going to get him on. He was on season 2, episode 14, talking about brain exercises, but we're going to do more in depth with him coming up. So I just wanted to do that as a little shout out of what's coming up. And next, we're going to take a look at our Well Home Design news. For Well Home Design news, I just wanted to shout out that on March 20th, it's International Day of Happiness. And why am I bringing that up? Well, first of all, it happens in March, but also I ran across an article. I'll double check, but I think it was in the LA Times or somewhere that said, the happy decor years are here, and it outlined the trends that interior designers are picking up on in order to make our homes not only kind of give us that sense of a dopamine rush where we get that reward, but also just comforting, calming sanctuary. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I felt like, wow, okay, again, maybe a little bit ahead of the curve because I've been writing about this for a long time. And under my Snug Home section of the Caregiving Club website, which is also now the Snug Home is, of course, going to become my 3rd book that I'll be doing. And hopefully that'll be published next year. I'm working hard on it. But I have also done a free webinar on our YouTube channel that you can check out, which is called Dementia Friendly Design. Now, that's very specific to dementia, but some of the principles are similar, and I'm gonna do another one that I'll share with you guys that is really based on more what we call now Neuro Design, or some people out there on TikTok are calling it dopamine design. So we've got a 7-minute self-care in 7 minutes video on dopamine design that I'll also share. We'll put that in the links on our episode guide page for this newscast. And then the Neuro Design is kind of broader, if you will. So I just want to give you kind of a sense of what I'm talking about, because this was both in the article. Oh, I'm sorry, it was the Miami Herald. This is the article from the Miami Herald. So dopamine design, or Neuro Design, is really about doing things that are intentional, that pick up on the 5 senses, my favorite thing. So it's multisensory. But things like smart organization, maximizing light, natural light coming into the home, natural woods and things of nature, definitely having enough greens and living things, living plants, curves that mimic, like, mountaintops that are kind of curvy, or clouds that are curvy, or shells that are curvy. All of the things from nature that our brain connects with to make us calmer. Those are the kinds of things you want to look for now in the interior design of your home. And there's some really interesting ways to do it. Like, you're thinking to yourself, well, oh gosh, do I have to have a shell shaped table? No. It's more just kind of starting to adopt some of those principles into the design. We'll have a whole lot of examples in the Snug Home book that I'm doing, and we'll also share some with you on that webinar that I'll put together. The other piece of this, though, is the biophilic design. So this is where the greenery comes in. This is all about bringing in those woods, fire, natural light, green plants, water sources if you can, things like, maybe small little fountains, or a fountain outside that you can listen to by opening up the window, things like that. So, one study just on this the biophilic design, which, by the way, was a word that was coined by E.O. Webster, who was at Harvard, who did a lot of this research back and when. But in Psychology Today, there was a study that was done just a few years ago, and it said participants were less stressed and fatigued in wooden indoor spaces than non-wooden ones. Using measures that included blood pressure, skin temperature, near-distance vision, and heartbeat, the researchers concluded the wood-filled environments had positive benefits for the respiratory and nervous systems and helped facilitate restoration after work. So there's science behind all this, that things that help us become more calm. I've talked about Neuro Design. We had Linda Kafka, by the way. I'll have her podcast. We just talked to her last season, season 5. But she's the head of the Neuro Design University that are doing certificates now around this. And everybody from real estate agents to builders to architects to interior designers and people like me, gerontologists, are jumping in to learn more about this whole area, because it's going to become huge. On the curves point, which was interesting, it found that rooms with curvature were rated more pleasurable and stimulating than rooms defined by angular geometry. So, for instance, all of our hallways are pretty much on a grid, right? It's like, okay, go down the hallway, and then the bedrooms are off to the sides or whatever. But have you ever been in a space or a home where you kind of have to curve around? And there's something about it. I did a talk a few weeks ago, and I talked about how Disney and Disneyland was one of the best examples of this, using Neuro Design. Because if you go to Disneyland, and you may not have even realized this, there are no grid lines in Disneyland. It's all curving paths. Okay, now you hit Main Street, and that's a single line, but off of Main Street, you're going to curve around, and of course, there's greenery everywhere, beautiful flora, and all of that going on. There's aromatherapy that they use. Anyway, it's a great, great example of how to use the multisensory immersive environments that make people feel happier, make people feel better. But curvilinear rooms, curvilinear furniture, so anything that has a sharp edge. If you've got a dining room table and it's got sharp edges and it's a rectangle, maybe turn it into a round table. If you've got a couch that has sharp edges, maybe you get something that has more curves on it or whatever. All of those things, even the counters. Sometimes as we get older, we get bruised a lot because our skin's thinner. So you want to use your counters, make sure they're not sharp. If your balance was off and you kind of, hit the counter a little bit, you want it to have that nice rounded curve. So all of these things are things that we're looking at. And also the curves do relate to the cortex in the brain, which is the area of the brain for emotional learning and stimulation. So again, this is the brain science behind this Neuro Design. And then there's things like color and contrast, and I'll get into that in the webinar if you want to take a look at that. But color psychology, contrast, because as we age, our eyes don't see between certain colors as well. We've got to make sure there's good contrast so we know where to stop, or what we're doing. Clutter-free. We're in spring cleaning mode these months, so the clutter-free is really important. And what this does is this goes back to the brain's sense of threats. So again, if you think about the ancient brain that we used 2 to 3 million years ago, where we weren't able to see around that corner, we weren't able to see what was under all of those bushes and heavy hedge or whatever that we're looking at, that creates and strikes this fight or flight response, our stress response in our bodies. Well, the same thing happens now in our modern homes. If you've got a lot of clutter, you've got a stack of magazines, you've got, you know, things you can't see behind. You've got a lot of clothes that are piled on top of the chair. I know we all do it, right? It creates a threat in the brain and it really stresses us out. And so it really does become important to keep things clear, to make sure we can see, because that eliminates the threat and the brain will be soothed. When it walks into the room, it doesn't have to worry that there's a lion, tiger, or bear behind those clothes on the chair. It knows that everything's okay. So it may seem silly, but it's actually very real. And, we're trying to understand our brains and stress better, and that's a little bit of it. And then certainly one of the biggest trends I think happening is the comfort sources. And we talk about this when people move into assisted living. You want to make sure that their environment has comfort source, things that are familiar, things that bring up past memory. The grand millennial trend has been so big. Hometown, which is one of the popular shows on HGTV, uses a lot of grand millennial style. Erin Napier is kind of the queen of grand millennial, and that's taking things from your grandparents' era, and then you kind of do something different with it, paint it a different color, incorporate it into something like a couch or a table or whatever it is. Those people are so clever, but it's doing things that also just bring that comfort, whether it's photographs on the wall or something that just reminds you of certain things that bring happiness to your life. And that kind of nostalgia and comfort and memory design is a big part of Neuro Design, because again, it does give us that happiness, that dopamine burst. Now, I want to also talk really quickly in our Well Home Design section, 3 products I came across that I thought were really great. They relate to brain health, but they also relate a lot to sleep, which we just talked about in our last episode, a lot of the sleep science that's out there. So one was the Hatch Restore 2 Sunrise Alarm Clock. So there was a study that was done a couple of years ago that showed that morning blood pressure surge was 74% higher than those who woke up on their own. Okay, so this is a really interesting alarm clock, and I checked it out. But you want to wake up to light. The sound has to be something that is a little bit more nature. It's not meh, 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 like a fire alarm. And you want to use the light and the fire and the fire alarm and the sound. It's nature sound combined, because again, that is more comforting. That is our natural way of waking. And it's all built around circadian rhythms of light and dark cycles during the 24-hour day, right? So what you want to do is you want to use this alarm clock. It's fascinating, and I'll have pictures. We'll throw them up on the screen, so while I'm talking, you can look at these things. But they offer 2 different, if you're a bed sharing couple, then you have you can do different wake up times, and only the person who sees the light is the person closest to the Restore 2. So we'll show how that works. There's 18 different preset options. So it's color, but it's also different. Like there's a tune called Lavender Sky, which sounds kind of spa-like. But it's all about sensory awakening. And, when you were a kid, you say, okay, give me 90 more seconds, right? You hit the snooze button or something, or 10 more minutes or whatever it is. But once you click the button, the soft nature sound continues to play. So it's kind of, it's soothing you into awakeness, right? Anyway, I thought this was really interesting. You may want to check it out. It is a subscription, so you buy the product and then there's a subscription. I think it's about $5 a month, and you can get more. You can get a free version, which just is the wake up light and sounds, and then you can get more that give you like meditations and sleep stories and music and some other stuff. The next thing, and here we go again, the Snug home is becoming popular. I'm telling you, I'm onto something here. This is called the Perfectly Snug Mattress Topper, Starting to see a lot of home wellness products use the word snug. So something going on out there. Anyway, this is a little pricey. It's $1,400. Probably not within most of our budgets. Maybe for our holiday gift guide, we'll get them to give us a discount or something. But anyway, this has dual settings for couples that you can have different cooling and heating depending on, what you like. And then each of the zones in this mattress is equipped with internal fans that propel cooling air under and around your body. And you can do the same thing with heat. So in the colder months, you can do that with heat. And it automatically adjusts. So what it does is it starts to learn your biorhythms and your body temperature. And then if you set it so that each side of the bed is a different person, again, it's personalizing it for you. It gets to know what you like, what temperature is good for you, and it starts to just automatically create that relief for you. So particularly for women who are going through menopause, a certain period of life, you don't have to get up now and go put your face in the freezer for a few minutes. They've been doing tasks and surveys and research with women going through menopause and using this perfect snug mattress topper, and it just gives these little bursts of air. Apparently, you can set it that way to give you that feeling of not having that hot flash. So really interesting. A little pricey. So that's one. And then the final one I really love. This is probably my favorite. It's called Memory Air. New product I just came across because they just inked a deal with Silverado, which is the memory care community. They're huge. They're on the East Coast, they're on the West Coast, Texas, other places. But anyway, they just inked a deal to put the Memory Air system into all of their residence apartments. And what it is it is using basically the sense of scent. So of our five senses, the sense of smell is very important. And I just did a podcast interview with Dr. Michael Leon, who is with UCI. He's the world's top researcher in this space of sense and how our brains work. And so he did a study with older adults that showed a certain combination of scents that are delivered very quietly at night actually helped improve the memory of these older adults by 266%. And that includes people who have maybe early stage dementia and mild cognitive impairment, which is why Silverado jumped on it, because they're like, hey, this can help our people with Alzheimer's, but just all of us in general. And what's interesting is I've always heard, of course, lavender is a great scent to use to get you into sleep. The ancient Egyptians used it. But I talked to Dr. Leon about this, and he's like, it's not one scent. He said sometimes it's personalized, but he said we found 40 scents, and a combination of those are what really work for people. And so they're improving, getting you to sleep faster, keeping you into the deep restorative sleep cycles that we need for sleep health. They're improving memory. They're improving brain health. I kind of love this thing. And I'm a big fan of the scents. Now, some people have what's called anosmia, which is a lack of sense of smell. And some people got that through COVID, or if you've had a brain injury, or if you've had any kind of virus, sometimes our sense of smell. And of course, as we age, we start to lose our sense of smell, just like we lose, hearing and eyesight and all those other wonderful senses that we have that don't work quite as well. But this actually, Dr. Leon calls this scent training. And he said one of the things that has happened to us is that as we became modern humans, we stopped relying on our sense of smell as much. We rely on other things to let us know if something is good or something is bad or it's a threat or we should eat it or shouldn't eat it or whatever it is. And he said we just don't rely on a sense of smell. And so many of us don't use our sense of smell hardly at all, even though we feel it might be declining. And he explains this on the podcast, and it's so fascinating. I think you'll really enjoy that interview if you're into this. But Memory Air gets our thumbs up. Again, you buy the system or the product that you put next to your bed, and then it does have a subscription where it delivers the different scents and everything to you. month by month, which is really cool. So you may want to check that out. And with that, we're going to move into our caregiving in the workplace. For caregiving in the workplace, I wanted to just do a couple of quick notes. One is I was really grateful to be asked by the Starner Group of Raymond James, which is based in Miami. That's the financial advisors down in Miami. They asked me to come out there and do a talk on longevity planning, what it means to, maybe make it to 100 or beyond, and also talk a little bit about the things I always talk about, brain health and the five senses, and, how do we maintain that quality of life, as we know we're going to get these bonus years of life. So that was really great. And I just want to say thank you for doing that. Met a lot of really great people at the event. But one of the things that really impressed me is that, and this is the workplace related comment that I have, Raymond James, of course, has a lot of really great benefits through their human resources department for their employees. But they also have done something very innovative and very, I think, unique, but it's starting to trend among employers and among companies to curate different services that could support their clients. So let me explain that. One of the women, Emily Treasure, who also spoke at this event, is with Raymond James, and she oversees their longevity planning. And so she has gone ahead and researched different partners in different areas. So whether it is elder financial abuse, whether it is, caregiving concierge navigation help that's needed, a variety of different things, home modification, other things. She's found the partners that they want to work with, and then they have become part of this longevity planning circle that get offered to their clients. So as they're advising their clients on retirement and all the things that come with aging, they're also able to provide trusted, what they feel are vetted resources that they might be able to give discounts to, or whomever. They also do concierge medicine and things like that. So I just thought, it is a trend. I'm seeing more and more of it. I'm glad to see it, because I think one of the biggest deficits and gaps that we have in the workplace is the care navigation piece. I mean, we like to go in and give education and train caregivers on things they should know, but at the same time, we realize caregivers have no time. You have no time to research all of these things, and it is a vast, unbelievable world. I keep a listing of, it's now up to, I think we're up to 727 companies. They are in different categories. So it might be home care. It might be age tech, like helping sleep tech. It might be transportation. A lot of people that we have on the podcast, it's all those different categories of people. We track all of those companies, and, to see what they're doing, to see who's going to emerge at the top, because sometimes, everybody jumps in, but not everybody kind of winds up, if you're an entrepreneur, as we all know, may not wind up lasting. But there is so much going on in this space. You couldn't possibly be someone. I mean, it's hard enough for me, and I've been doing this now for more than 20 years. I can't imagine just being thrown into the middle of it when you're trying to work through the emotions and other things of caregiving. So I think it is one of the better trends out there that I'm seeing, and I'm doing an appeal, if you will, to employers to recognize that your employees do need access, they do need help guiding them to the right resources they can trust, that they have peace of mind and confidence in. And typically that comes through an expert or an expert service, like a care navigation service that can connect your employees to those resources. Because a lot of times too, the resources aren't national, they're local. And you have to have somebody that knows that local market. The Miami market is different from Dallas market, which is different from the Chicago market. So you really have to have someone that understands those local resources and can get your employees to the resources they need and give them peace of mind and give them some time back, which would be a great gift for all caregivers. So just a shout out, because I think Raymond James is one of the financial services companies out there doing a really great job. Second thing, In January of last year, U.S. News and World Report partnered with the Society for HR Management. That's a trade association group for HR people, and also the Milken Institute on the Center for Aging. And the three of them came together and put out rankings of the best companies to work for if you're a family caregiver. And I mean, we all just applauded. We fell over, because we've been waiting for it for so long. The Great Places to Work, which is a different organization, they had started touching on some of the caregiving benefits as one of the criteria to be a great places to work. It's not fully formed yet or fully baked, and I hope that that gets a little stronger in their criteria, but they started. This was a big one. This was like full on what companies are great for family caregivers. There was some flaws in the methodology, I will say, because they were only publicly held companies on a certain, I don't have it in front of me, on that were part of a certain trading or something. So it wasn't everybody, but it was a start. Well, I've been waited with bated breath for the 2026 rankings and nothing. So I've reached out for you. I've reached out to all three organizations and said, hey, what's up? Hopefully this wasn't a one-off just to grab some headlines, but I don't think so. I think hopefully they will get it together. Maybe they are expanding the criteria and it took them longer methodology wise. Maybe they looked at more companies or something, but I'm going to keep on top of this for you because I think things like that are really fantastic because it means society is paying attention. We're recognizing how important this is. And let me tell you, there's a little incentive, right? I mean, companies like to make these lists. They like to be at the top of the leaderboard. And if you know that supporting your employees who are caregiving as well as part of that, you're maybe going to step it up or you're going to put some emphasis there. So it's all good. And then lastly, just really quickly, I wrote an article that I'll have a link to, and it was around the influence, and it was for the Care for Business team, and it's around the influence of ERGs or employee resource groups. So there's been a lot of these ERGs that have formed, and as we know, it's all based on kind of similar values or interests. So, it's like moms at work, African Americans at work, whatever it is, there's all these different ERGs. We've seen a lot of the ERGs now start to expand from parenting into caregiving, meaning also the elder care, senior care piece of this. And I've been really lucky to go out and talk. I think I've mentioned it before. I've gone out and done some talks with these ERGs. I think I can mention the companies, but like Ipsen and Astellas and General Mills and Wells Fargo and several others. But anyway, they're really important, and they certainly can have an influence on how caregivers are seen in the workplace, and particularly programs, benefits, support, whatever it is. So I wrote an article. Hopefully employers will take a look at that and HR departments take a look at it, but I'll have a link on there if you're interested. Now, getting into some of our other news, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal, and this is a really fascinating one. It was on retirement, and it was and the headline was the retirement crisis no one warns you about, mattering. So it was a really great article, and it's on something that we talk a lot about, which is finding meaning, which to me is kind of the same thing. Like, do I matter? What's the meaning in my life, right? But as we retire and we leave careers or jobs that maybe we've been at for a long, long time, and we achieved a certain level of success or just feeling good about our accomplishment there, it's kind of like, now what, right? So some people pivot into encore careers. They become consultants. They hang out a shingle to do certain work that might be related to that previous job, or become a mentor or a volunteer or whatever it is. But it is important to kind of have, okay, I've got to pivot into something else, right? Because very often we can just be stopped in our tracks and it's like, oh my gosh, I have no plan. And really interesting because I mentioned Raymond James earlier. So the woman that I had been working with on this event is in her 80s, and she said, I've had a couple of those pivots in my life where it was like, well, what do I do now? And by the way, she is still working. She is still an advisor, which is fascinating. She's one of our Super Agers for sure. But it's a really great article, and I think it's something to think about both for ourselves if we're kind of getting near that quote unquote retirement age. Nobody really, quite frankly, retires anymore for a couple reasons. One is many boomers, and I put myself in this category, we can't stop working. We need to keep making money because we know we're going to live longer and maybe we haven't got the savings that we feel we need or whatever it is. Other people, it's just, you don't want to look at the next 30 years of doing what, you can only go on so many cruises and play so many rounds of golf and the pleasure part of retirement is great, but we also need something that gives us more of that purpose, that passion in life. The other article that I found that was really interesting, it was about the sandwich generation delaying their health needs and being in health debt. So this is from the survey that was done. 52% of U.S. adults have delayed or skipped necessary care, meaning healthcare, in the last 12 months. And this was a cohort of adults, 1,000 adults. Many of them were sandwich generation. So again, caring for two generations, both kids as well as older parents or in-laws or even grandparents. And, it's really interesting because they're foregoing treatments that are preventive for chronic illness. And this is leading to, of course, increased anxiety over the fact that you're missing that doctor appointment or not getting your mammogram or prostate exam, maybe letting the illness linger and not getting into the doctor and getting the antibiotic or getting the medication or something that can help, that you can get past it quicker. And so it's reducing workplace productivity and possibly increasing employer health costs. This is why I wanted to bring it into this section of caregiving in the workplace, because I think employers need to pay attention to this too. It's like, yikes. Okay, if we've got a lot of workers in the sandwich generation who are foregoing for whatever reason, if it's cost, if it's time, but not getting their annual wellness checks, not doing this, not following up on these things, in a selfish way, it's going to cost the company. So, but very often that's the motivator for a lot of things, right? We know that. So I think it's really important to talk about health, talk about some of these preventive things, make sure that employees have access. One of the things the survey found that was interesting is that Gen X said basically they just feel priced out of the healthcare market. They just can't afford it. 48% skipped their healthcare exams and other things because of the high out-of-pocket costs. So, you've got a deductible, and the deductible is really high, and you've got to meet that before any of the insurance kicks in. So just forget it, not doing it, whatever. That's a huge concern. But for millennials, for the younger sandwich generation group, 39% delayed care because they just didn't feel like they were sick enough. It's like, hey, I'm not on my deathbed, so I'll just, power through it. And they didn't have enough time. So, now one of the things that's really interesting about the millennials is that as opposed to the boomers who, we gave ourselves badges for being workaholics and working all night and weekends and nights and all that kind of stuff. Millennials don't necessarily do that. But what millennials do is they prize their personal time. They are a little bit more balanced in terms of work-life balance, and they say, okay, yeah, I leave work at 5, but then, I've got a hockey game, or I've got, pickleball I'm going to go do, or I'm just going out to dinner with friends or whatever it is, or I'm going to go spend, some time with my kids. So they have that balance, but they still don't have a lot of free time. And particularly, again, if they're sandwich generation, they are caring for a lot of people, and that means your time is really squeezed. So just some things to think about. I think it's important because I think it's both a dilemma for employees on the personal health side. How do you find that time? How do we bring the healthcare costs into, affordability? It's a huge problem right now. And then from the employer's perspective, be aware of these trends, because what maybe can you do to message things better, make sure it's okay if employees take time off, because they've got to go to the doctor, make sure that maybe they have, health plans that have access to the telehealth kind of stuff, if they can do it that way. Whatever it is, we've got to work together on these things because they're just too important for our overall society and our overall health and what's happening in the workplace with caregiving. So next, we're going to go to our pop culture segment, and we're going to try to stay positive. for pop culture, we're going to take a little bit of a turn from what we've been doing, talking about movies and TV shows, and also, things like the Nancy Guthrie case, although I do have a comment on that at the very end of this. But we're going to talk a little bit about ageism. Now, I know we have a lot of isms in our world, and we're probably sick of hearing about them. But ageism is something, of course, that hits my world of caregiving and aging and longevity. And it's a really important one to think about. And it's both being ageist against older people, and we see probably more of that, but it can also be ageist against younger people. So it goes across the age spectrum, if you will, when people are making disparaging remarks that relate to age. And one of the reasons why gerontologists and those of us in the aging community get so sensitive about this is because we know full well that age is just one thing that we look at in terms of, is somebody vital? Are they productive? What's happening with them or whatever. And it doesn't really play as big a factor as so many other things. And one of the things I will also mention that really kind of is like fingernails on a blackboard is when all of these surveys and all the things that are out there, for the most part, it's like 65 plus. So, we've got your age groups, 20 to 40, 40 to whatever, 65 plus. Okay. I would love anyone listening to this newscast to tell me if you think an average 60-year-old is the same as an average 80 or 90-year-old, right? So why are you putting this big, huge category out there? And again, that's not an ageist comment. It's just that there are different needs. There are different things happening. And so we probably need at least a couple of boxes for the quote unquote 65 plus. But all of that aside, the reason why I say I'm trying to stay positive is that I actually heard this on the news, and I love, just so you know, I listen to a variety of news. I like to listen to both sides. I know we're very polarized in our world these days, but I try to stay informed of what everybody's saying, try to sift through all that. And I also try to stay away from politics because, quite frankly, I think it's a toxin. It's a pox on our house, as Shakespeare would say. It's a toxin out there for us because it's just got people so jammed up. And it's really kind of sad because I know that while politics plays a role in our life, it shouldn't play as heavy a role or as big a role as it is right now. So that's just my 2 cents, and I will shut up now about politics. But here, so I'm flipping around the different newscasts or whatever, and so I happen to have it turned on to cable, and it was Fox TV News during the day, and there was an anchor who was filling in actually for another anchor. So she's not always on air, but she reports from Washington and all that. Her name is Jillian Turner. And again, I'm going to stay positive because you know me, I'm a positivity psychology gerontologist. So happiness and positivity is kind of what I try to bring to the world. So I don't want to now be a downer and really dogpile on this anchor. But what she said really surprised me and made me kind of sad, okay? Because again, it's like this is a very intelligent young woman. I know she's got kids. I don't know what age she is, but she looks younger than me. Let's say I'm in my early 60s, and her comment was this. So it was about the Nancy Guthrie story. So this is again Savannah Guthrie's 84-year-old mom, who we still haven't found, and it's just a tragic, sad story. So at the time, they were still investigating and heavy into it. And her comment was this. She said she had interviewed an expert in law enforcement. And then she said, we just don't know why we are sending and spending so many resources on both local and federal, meaning FBI, government, to find an 84-year-old when we have so many children missing in this country every day. Okay. And I was really shocked as I heard that. So my first thought was, oh my goodness, my heart goes out to her parents, her in-laws, her older aunts and uncles, and even grandparents if they're still alive, because boy, She's not there for you. From that comment, I'm sorry, you're on your own. But it was really kind of a comment that wasn't necessary because she could have been empathetic and she could have said something about, she's always thought about missing children, but she realizes now that it could be just as dire and tragic and sad for families who have older loved ones who either wander from, Alzheimer's and get lost or whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie. But she didn't go there. She went to the old people don't matter, and it's only about kids and parents of kids. Well, okay. Calm down, Sherry. Be positive. So my hope is that we can teach the news media to do better. And I'm saying that because even though I brought Jillian up as she's getting our award for the ageist anchor of the week, she is not alone, believe me. I mean, I've watched David Muir at ABC World News Tonight and, the morning show hosts and, even and I really like, Transportation Secretary Duffy, but with all the things going on with TSA and the backup it's at the airport, and I experienced it myself. I've been traveling a lot. The comment was on families with young kids, how tough it is for them to stand in lines, and I get it. Yeah, the kids are whiny and tired, and there's no place to sit because there's with everything going on. It also affects older parents. I mean, as somebody who is getting older, getting through these airports, and boy, you have to run to make your flight, and there's nowhere to sit. I mean, this is bad for older people too. So let's look at both sides. That's my positive ask. Let's look at both sides. Let's make them equal. Let's not make children more important than parents. Certainly it tugs at our hearts because older people have lived full lives, and you may think, well, it's not as important. It is. It is, and it is to those families. So let's not denigrate. Let's not make them lesser. And this whole thing about ageism too, it kind of cropped up a lot during COVID. One of the things, again, fingernails on the blackboard for me was when very many of the TV anchors out there, and they were talking about all the nursing home crises and all this, and but they were saying, elderly people over 50, elderly people over 60. Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to tell you that there has been a lot of work done by ARP and the American Society on Aging and the Gerontological Society of America, and they've done something called Reframing Aging. And it's from the Reframing Aging Institute. And they years ago went back and said, listen, language evolves, and we recognize that. And so these are things we don't want to do anymore. We don't want to use the word elderly because, quite frankly, it really does relate or describe someone who's frail and vulnerable, etc. And a lot of people don't see themselves that way. So don't use that just, again, wantonly for anybody over the age of 60. Doesn't make any sense, right? So the word elderly has kind of been ixnayed. But there's other terms too, like don't use, the aging in America as a crisis. Like everything's a crisis, right? We don't pay attention until it's a crisis. Silver tsunami. I mean, oh my gosh, all these older people crashing upon the beach, in our society. So anyway, being kind of humorous now, but there is some really great training out there. And organizations do go out and do the trainings. I do it as a consultant. I've done it with many of my employer clients. And I've come in and I've trained the C-suite, or I've trained middle managers or the HR departments, because we have multi-generational workplaces now. We want to be sensitive. And as I said, it's not just about older people. It could be younger people, the millennials, the Gen Zers that are lazy, that don't care, that quit every 5 minutes from their job. All of these things are such kind of stereotypes that we don't really need. So it's really interesting training. I think it really makes people think more about aging across the lifespan. And also, again, if we've doubled our lifespan potential, so I do this as part of my presentations often. In 1900, the average lifespan was 47 years old and you were done. Okay, that was the average, right? Flash forward 126 years now, We've almost doubled that. I mean, many people are living into their 90s and 100s, but the average age span is between like 78 and 82. Well, if we've almost doubled our average lifespan, how can we expect our workplaces to operate like they did in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s? When people were retiring. I mean, as I just mentioned in our last segment, some people can't retire. We have to keep working. So I think we just need to reshape and reframe how we think about aging. And it is kind of a fun exercise, but it's one that really opens up the thoughts of, yeah, we are living longer, and we haven't really taken a good hard look at all of this stuff. And again, not to dogpile on Jillian, but if for whatever reason she may hear this, I really hope that you can take a look at the comments and, again, don't denigrate based on age. So let's end this all on a very positive note. And I will say this, and this relates a little bit to what Jillian was talking about. The Guthrie family made an announcement a couple weeks ago, I think it was. They upped the money for anyone who has any information about their mom, Nancy Guthrie, so they can recover her. I think we're now, unfortunately, not into finding her, but recovering her and what has happened. They made also a $500,000 donation to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. And I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to the Guthries. What a generous, wonderful recognition that people do go missing. And I just want to tell you a quick story, and I'm going to put it up on my website. But years ago, when I worked for Canon, so this is way back in the 90s, I actually created a program in partnership with NCMEC, and it was to recover missing children faster. And there were many components to the program, but we ran a lot of ads because we had a very healthy advertising budget. We ran ads in a lot of the Time Inc. publications, and then we helped out law enforcement with the technology we had, whether it was printers or scanners, whatever, because we knew that the urgency of finding these kids within 12 hours was critical, because the success rate starts to drop from there, and that's both kids as well as older adults. The success rate drops after the first 12 hours, and it just keeps getting worse as it goes on. So anyway, the reason why I'm bringing it up is because probably one of the most amazing things that I've done in my life was that program. We were able to help law enforcement recover 38 missing children. Even now I think about it, just it brings tears to my eyes. But it's a great organization. It doesn't necessarily talk to the missing adults, and maybe at some point they can have a part of it that helps with missing adults, because their work is so amazing. They've done so many really great things. They do age progression, so that if a child is missing at age 2, they can do age progression with software that can show what that child now looks like. Maybe they've been missing for 20 years. They're 22 years old. But there's a lot of just really great work. So I applaud the Guthrie family for stepping up and doing something with an organization like that. To Jillian's point, I was amazed. We did an event in New York because I was just floored by the fact that 2,200 children go missing every day in this country. So again, we do have a lot of missing kids, but the missing older adults are as important as the missing kids, and we just have to do better at using our technology and our great, wonderful resources of law enforcement to find them as quickly as possible, and hopefully have a happy reunion for as many people as we can. So with that, that's my pop culture segment for this episode. That's a wrap for Caregiving Club Newscast this week. We hope you enjoyed these news segments. You can email us at info@caregivingclub.com to let us know a news story we should cover, or leave us a comment on our YouTube page. And don't forget to subscribe to our Caregiving Club YouTube channel to get all the caregiving news every other week, as well as our other content, our Me Time Monday Self-Care in 7 Minutes weekly videos, and our Caregiving Club On Air podcasts, which are available on our Caregiver Club YouTube channel, as well as Apple, Amazon, Spotify, SiriusXM, iHeartRadio, and other podcast listening channels. Find out more about Sherry and Caregiving Club at caregivingclub.com. Take care and stay well.